Chapter 6 picks up where Chapter 4 left off. And in Chapter 4, we had the present tense forms of the verb to be, of sum esse. And we're going to expand upon that. Chapter 5, we were introduced to the imperfect and future tense. We're going to have the imperfect and future tenses of the verb to be. As well, we're going to talk about this verb possum, which is very common in Latin. And again, we're going to get all three tenses for that. It's built off of the verb to be, so it shouldn't be too hard. Kind of if you know one, you know the other one. And then we're also going to talk about complementary infinitives, something we've seen before, but not given a name to. So, just to review, again, here's the present tense of the verb to be. Sum, est, sumus, estis, and sunt. And then you have the English translations in quotation marks. You can see we still have, again, all of the regular endings we would expect, an O or an M, an S, a T, an MUS, a TIS, and an NT. The big thing is that the stem changes. So we don't have a reliable stem. The infinitive is esse, E-S-S-E. And so even there, we don't get a regular stem with taking the infinitive and getting rid of the RE. There's no RE with esse. So all of this is irregular, and essentially you did have to memorize this. This was Chapter 4 again, but something that shouldn't have given you too much trouble. It's really just the fact that there's no reliable stem. Besides that, the endings are exactly the same. If you need to copy this down, please do so. If you haven't had it memorized, please do so. This is a very common verb, something we're going to see over and over and over again, and it's also used with other verb forms. So it's not going anywhere. You definitely need to know it, and this is just review. This is Chapter 4. Moving forward with the imperfect and future, so the present tense we can say something like I am happy. But what if we want to say I was happy or I will be happy? Well, you can do that just like we do in English. We change our form of the verb to be from am to was, or from am to will be. Same thing we're going to do in Latin. And again, it's all based on the endings. So the imperfect and future of sum esse are irregular. They don't follow having a reliable stem or being based on esse. In some way, they kind of are, but realistically, you just have to memorize them. Right? I hate having to say that. I can show you this pattern, but again, it's either memorize the pattern, which is really just memorizing the forms. Okay. The nice thing here is, though, that they're kind of related to the imperfect and the future endings. So bom, bas, bot, bomus, batis, bont, and bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitis, bunt. That's why I have them in this chart. Okay. Essentially, all that changes is that the B in the front of these endings, so the B in front of all of them, changes to an ER, and that's how you get the forms of the verb to be in these particular tenses. So all we do is we take that B and we switch it to an ER. So again, if you know the Chapter 5 material, these endings, bom, bas, bot, bo, bis, bit, change the B to an ER, and that gives you your forms for the verb to be in the imperfect and the future tenses. So what we have is eram instead of bom, that's I was. Eras instead of bos, you were. Erat, he, she, or it was. Eramos, we were. Eratis, you were. Erant, they were. And then in the future, bo becomes ero, I will be. Eris instead of bis, you will be. Erit, erimus, eritis, and erunt. So again, the change is simply from Chapter 5. You had a B, and those were your endings. They become just your forms in the imperfect and future by changing the B to an ER. Now, if you want to know it that way, that's the link I can give you. Again, maybe it's just helpful, and maybe it's easier for you just to simply memorize them. Whichever one works for you, right? I can show you the sort of underlying structure, and if that works for you, that's great. If not, here you go. Here are the forms. You need to have these memorized. Again, these show up just like the forms of sum in the present tense will show up again with other verb forms. These are going to show up again as well. I promise you, I promise you, I promise you. Moving on. The verb possum, possed, potui. Again, you look, hey, there's no re in the infinitive. The second part looks kind of weird. This is the verb that means it is a verb that means to be able to, or can, or could. Like I say, it's a very common verb. It's formed off of the forms of sum esse. And all you do really is you add a pot in front of the forms of sum esse. This prefix pot, it's where we get the words like potent or potential. There's a Latin adjective potens, potentis, which just means powerful. And so really what you're saying here is like, I am powerful. You're taking that sum and adding pot there, and that's really what you're saying. So it's like you have the power to do something. But forming it is super easy because all you're doing is you're taking that pot, adding it to the forms of to be. There you go. It's pretty cut and dry. So again, if you know sum, you should know possum. The only rule is that if the form of sum starts with an S, then the pot is going to become a pos in front. And we even see that in possum, right? It's not potsum. For some reason, that didn't sound good to the Romans, and so they made it possum. Okay, really, that only affects 3 forms. There's only 3 forms in the present tense. No others are really affected by that. But it is a rule you need to be aware of. If the form of to be starts with an S, then you have to make it POS. And yes, there'll be 2 S's there. POSSUM. So, here are all the forms, again, of the verb to be. Please have them written down if you don't already. And then all we're doing is we're adding POT to all of them. Okay, POT in front, and that's how you get your forms of possum to be able to. And then simply we have possum because that's an S, right? So that T is going to change to an S. POT becomes POS. Pot est, possumus, podestis, and possunt. So it's really only in the present tense where we have those S's. That's the only place that rule even matters. All the other ones, if you remember back to your future and imperfect forms of to be, they all start with an E. So it's just pot and then eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratis, and erant. Pot in front of those. Same thing in the future. Ero, well, it's potero. Eris, poterit, poterimus, poteritis, and poterunt. That's all you do. That's it, to form these. And then obviously, just push your personal ending in front. So like, I am able, you are able, he, she, or it is able. The imperfect, I was able, you were able, he, she, or it was able. And then in the future, it's always will be able. I will be able to, you will, he, she, or it will. Look at your endings. Your endings still tell you your person. MST, mustisenti, or OST, mustisenti. Lastly, we need to talk about complementary infinitives. And this isn't complimentary with an I. A compliment is like, oh, you look so nice today. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the word complementary with an E, which essentially means completing. That's why we, like, if you look at it, the beginning starts exactly the same, or completion, or something like that. It's a finishing infinitive. It rounds off the meaning of the sentence. So, it will be used with verbs like possum, audeo, which is this chapter's, and debeo. Now, a verb like possum means to be able. You can't just say, I can, in a sentence, unless there's something else implied. Like if someone says, can you go to the store? You can say, I can, but the implied meaning is, I can go to the store. There is a complementary infinitive there. Audeo means to dare. You have to be able to dare to do something. You can't just say, he dares. He dares to do what? You need something there. Same thing, debeo, we've seen it. Debeo can mean to owe, but there's also this use of a complementary infinitive where we have the word like should, ought, or must. And so if we look at this sentence, we have amicus meus remanere non podest. Remanere is an infinitive there. It ends in ere. Okay, and we have the verb possum. So the way we would translate this is, my friend is not able to remain, or my friend is not able to stay. You could not just say, my friend is not able. And if you had no context to that sentence, with some implied meaning that doesn't make any sense. My friend isn't able. And most people say to do what? Right? And so that complementary infinitive, re mon re, rounds out the meaning of the sentence. Same thing here, debes conservare. We have seen debeo plus an infinitive. In this sense, it just says you should. So it's basically this sentence without conservare says you should your money. And that doesn't make any sense. Or you ought your money. We need to have some meaning there as to what ought you to do or what should you do. And so the translation should be you ought to save your money. It's a complementary infinitive. It's finishing off or completing the meaning of the verb, right? So you ought to do what? You ought to save your money, okay? Now, it's still an infinitive, so it still should be translated as to whatever. That should be obvious. But we're going to see this a lot. This is used a ton in the language, and become familiar with it, okay? Just because this is the last thing for the video doesn't mean it's not important. It shows up all of the time in Latin. So that is it for this chapter. I do understand that this is a lot of memorization. There's a lot going on in this chapter as far as just having to memorize things. But if you learn the pattern, if you learn how things are related to each other, it makes it a little bit easier. And also, these words show up a ton in Latin. They're all over the place. You do need to know these. This is a very important chapter. These words will keep showing up again and again and again. These forms of sum and possum, either with other verb forms, or they're both very commonly used by themselves. So the more and the sooner you commit this to memory, the easier time you're going to have as we move forward. I promise you. Memorize this stuff and it will serve you well.